Welcome to the EMEA Recruitment Podcast, proud to support international medical charity Operation Smile. If you're interested in ways you can help support this cause, please visit emearecruitment.com/operation-smile. In this episode, we speak to Tal Volok, the CFO at Evalueserve in Switzerland. Tal explains the need to always step out of your comfort zone in your career to energise yourself and achieve growth.
So, hello everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As Rose mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Tal onto the podcast today. Now, obviously, because of the COVID situation, we're not meeting in person, so we're doing this over Zoom. So hopefully you can hear me okay, Tal.
I can.
Okay, perfect.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. The miracles of modern technology. I think everyone's getting quite used to these video calls these days.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's the standard greeting now is, can you see my screen? Can you hear me? So you have to do that technology check before you start any conversation these days.
Yeah, this is it. I thought before we really start going into the questions we got lined up, it's difficult to have these kind of conversations these days without really asking, what how you found the situation really over the last 20 months of COVID. But maybe I like to try and put a slightly different angle on it. So is there anything positive that you've taken from this time, or anything you've learned about yourself or the way of working that you are able to take forward with you to hopefully the better period of things when COVID becomes a thing of the past?
Sure. So, there's certainly plenty of things that came out of it. I think my current role, I probably would have never taken had COVID not happened for a variety of reasons. And so, the work from home, I would say up until March 13th of 2020, I had not worked from home one day in my career. And, part of that is just being in finance, being in a function that needs to be close to the business, needs to understand what's happening in the business. For me, it was essential to be there. But then also we access a lot of data, and you have shared drives. So the technology aspect of it as well means that being on the company network, used to be quite an essential part of being able to do your job fluidly. So be able to access information quickly, not have to go through VPNs or additional steps in order to get work done. And so, certainly when we went home to start with, it required us to really reevaluate how we worked. Now, the interesting thing is I was used to having teams that were quite dispersed. So at the time that we went to work from home, I had a team based in Montreal. I was based here in Switzerland, in Geneva. I had a team in the Czech Republic. We had a team in the US. And so we were already spread out. The majority of the team wasn't working in the office face to face with me. Nonetheless, it was still a huge change. And I will say the leadership team of the company was all in the same location here in Geneva. And so, it definitely is one of those things where a lot of times change is something that needs to be kind of forced on you. And then you realize, hey, I'm capable of adjusting and adapting to a new situation. And yes, there are some challenges in it, but there's also some things that are pluses. So certainly I gained kind of the kind of eliminating the chaos of the morning and the evening commutes. And, I have 3 kids, so the morning tends to be quite hectic to begin with. And so combining that with trying to get into the office and managing calls, and, in a global business, you have calls in Asia that are early in the morning, and then you have calls in North America that are later in the day. And so it certainly takes, that element out of it and makes it a lot easier. Now, at first, that meant that we were working kind of 24 hours a day because you had to adjust, and because you were home, you were online. And so it kind of changed that dynamic. Plus, we were in crisis mode. So at the time of COVID, I was working in the travel industry. So we were quite heavily impacted. But I would say, back to my point about how I got to my current role. So part of it was due to the impact of COVID on the business that I was in. But part of it was also the company I work for today. We are headquartered in Switzerland, but we're actually very much a virtual company, which was pre-COVID. It's just the nature of the business. And so that said, our CEO is based in the US. The executive team is really kind of dispersed, everywhere. We have a big operations center in India, in Chile, in Romania, in Shanghai. And so the business, had I interviewed with them and seen that opportunity while I was still working in the office pre-COVID, I probably would have said, well, I can't imagine taking this role and working without there being like a significant presence in a headquarters and a place where I would go to work in the office. And so that's why I say that, that would probably be the biggest thing that came out of it from a work perspective, was being open to an opportunity that probably I wouldn't have been before. And so that's where, again, when new situations present themselves and change happens and you adapt and you kind of realize that, hey, it opens up new opportunities and changes your perspective on what's possible. So that part was certainly quite a positive. The other big positive, which certainly there are pros and cons to working from home. I'm certainly not going to paint it as being all just wonderful experience, but certainly being able to be more part of the family unit and kind of spend more time at home and maybe share lunch and dinner with the family, whereas before maybe it was neither some days, but at best it was just dinner. And so just getting more exposure to the kids and their everyday lives. Again, sometimes that can be a bit disruptive, but overall it's been kind of a really nice experience.
No, it's interesting to hear, and I think you mentioned about the journey that you've been on over the last few months, but also through the whole of the COVID situation. And I think obviously a big part of that is the reality that we had to change in the way we worked and the way we focused and prioritized things. So I thought I'd just ask, because you mentioned it in the answer there, with three children, teams across the world. I mean, is there a way that you prioritize and focus your work, and how have you tended to do that and be successful at it?
Certainly prioritization. I think prioritization at the business level, but then and at the individual level is a critical piece, because we know we can all fill more than 24 hours a day with doing things, all of which are potentially valid, but you need to make choices. It's one of the things that I push quite a bit, so we're in the budget cycle, as most companies are this time of year. And so if you ask people what they want to do next year, you get a long kind of Christmas wish list, which obviously is typically not affordable. And so the question is, okay, well, how do you prioritize that? And so, typically I try to, as a finance person, I try to have a bit of a formula for how I go about looking and prioritizing things. Now, it's unavoidable that you have things that are just critical and time sensitive, and those things tend to get the first crack. But then, I do try to prioritize, and this has been an important thing. I think I've been better at it in the last few years, which is prioritizing thinking time. And it really is something that can pay off huge dividends. So, just blocking off time and, using that to think about what's the roadmap of the function, what are things I want to do in terms of priorities within my organization, what do I think about certain challenges within the business, and maybe digging into them and looking at them from different perspectives, even going externally and just looking and doing some analysis on competitors and going through their 10Ks and kind of, assessing what they're doing and how it's being viewed. These things can really add a lot of value and bring new thoughts into how you approach challenges within the business. And I have to say, I'll take the opportunity to make an unsolicited plug for EMEA. The other part of that is making time for networking. And EMEA has really done a wonderful job. For me, it's been invaluable being an expat here in Switzerland to really meet and network and get plugged into different events and different opportunities to meet people and hear new ideas. And it's really critical to keep that going and to find time, in your schedule for those sort of activities.
No, I know you obviously, the network can't see me at the moment, but if they could, they'd see me smiling on the end of the line here. So it's always nice to get a good recommendation from people like yourself. And I mean, obviously that leads me quite nicely onto one of the questions I had, actually, because with the podcast being in partnership with Operation Smile, I thought a question I usually like to ask the guests is what was the last thing that made you smile, Tal?
So actually, when you mentioned the Operation Smile, I had to look it up because I wasn't familiar with it. But it's really a great cause. It's nice to see the work that they're doing to help children, with cleft palate, and something like that certainly can detract from the joy of childhood. So it's really great to see that. I mentioned earlier I have 3 kids. And they do actually contribute in a variety of ways to making me smile, on a daily basis. It can be funny things that they do and say, whether intentionally or unintentionally, having fun together, because really when you spend time with kids, it allows you to take off your adult hat for a bit and just have some fun and be a kid. But then there's also the other element of just seeing them develop and taking pride in the things that they do and the successes that they have. And that certainly, makes you smile as well, in a different way. So I would say that's really the source of a lot of pleasure, and that goes back to what I mentioned about being home more gives you a chance to really get to know them more in a way, and enjoy them as they're growing up.
No, that is true. As you mentioned there, able to spend more time with family, friends, and so on, and I think this all contributes to better well-being, and as you mentioned yourself, with the whole situation now, being able to take time out and think about the bigger picture of things, it helps you to be more successful in your role, which then obviously has a knock-on effect of focusing and prioritizing in the right areas. So it's all leading towards being just generally happier and smiling a bit more, which I think everyone likes to be in that situation. And I suppose on the positive theme, you mentioned that you've fairly recently started this new role in the CFO at Evalueserve. So, what does it feel like to be in this position now?
Yeah, so I started September 1st. I was with SITA, which is in the travel, communications, and technology industry, and so I was with them for about 8 years. So quite a nice run. And actually, the last role that I was in with them was probably the longest. Well, not probably, it was the longest that I was in one single role with a company. Usually, I would kind of switch more often and look to take on new roles. But this was a bigger opportunity as a divisional CFO for one of their businesses, and so I was in that role for about 6 years. And so great experience there, but certainly felt as though I came to a point where I needed new challenges. And I found that ever since early in my career, I've always been encouraged. I started my career with General Electric in a rotational program, which by nature, you're jumping from one role to another quite quickly. And they really pushed you hard to say, even after the program, every year and a half, 2 years, you should be going into a new role. In a different part of the business, a different perspective, different manager. And I agree. I mean, that really, for me, that's kind of your education, is those early years of your career and getting exposed to as much as possible. Of course, school, you get a baseline, but really, you learn when you get into the corporate world and you start to realize what makes a company work, what makes it successful. And then certainly when you get into the managerial side, what it takes to build a strong team. So, coming to the end of my role at SITA, I was really looking to put myself back into a situation where I was at the bottom of the learning curve. And I find that you have to sort of force yourself to do that because we all get comfortable and we get in our comfort zone. And that's great. That's sort of what you strive for, is to get to that point where you're in the flow and you're able to make decisions and you're adding value and, you're comfortable in your role. You've built the team the way you want it to be. But then you sort of need to disrupt yourself. And so that was a bit what this was for me, was saying, okay, what's next? And how do I put myself back into a situation where I have to learn, where I'm not the one that has the answers, and I need to learn, I need to climb that learning curve. And I know it's uncomfortable. By nature, you're going to be uncomfortable when you're in that situation. And I think the more senior you are in your career, the more uncomfortable it is to be in that position where you really don't have all the answers. You don't know how to separate fact and fiction in certain areas. But I also think that's where the growth comes from. And so, that part of being out of your comfort zone is what ultimately generates growth. And so that's what pushed me to taking the role. And certainly, it's now been 2.5 months. I'm far from, over that learning curve, still in the steep end of it. However, things are going quite well, and I'm very happy with the decision. I think I'm in the right place for the stage of my career that I'm in. Now, work from home, starting a new company, I'd say is maybe not the most positive thing. And so, because a big part of joining a new company is building relationships, because that's how ultimately you get things done, is by having those relationships across the business. And so, being remote certainly adds a layer to that. It means it develops less quickly than it might if you were sitting face to face. And probably the most critical one is the relationship between myself and our CEO, because I've always found that's a key dynamic in terms of setting the tone for the business, and having that right chemistry and being able to play off each other. And ultimately, my role in a lot of ways is to anticipate what he needs to be successful before he knows that he needs it. And that's not easy to do when you only interact, for a couple hours over a video call, a week, and we're on different time zones, which I'm used to managing that sort of thing. But I guess the restrictions on travel is probably the most challenging part of it. And hopefully we're moving towards, and we've said that so many times over the last 2 years, it's hard to believe, but hopefully we're moving towards a bit easier travel, over the next 12 months or so. Mm-hmm. So overall, when you're in that new skill set, it takes longer and it takes a lot more effort to get things done that maybe than it will when you get that fluidity. And so you really even have to prioritize more, back to your early point, because it takes a while to dig into things, and you need to get under the surface. So everybody comes in, they want to make a good impression, they want to present things in a particular way, and not that they're trying to mislead or anything like that. However, I need to be able to form my own views. So I need to be able to dig beneath the surface and start to formulate a view on how the business is doing and how it needs to be steered and where I need to step up and play a bigger role. But then also within my team, what are our strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the things that we need to develop going forward? Nobody's going to tell you when you walk in the door, hey, we're really bad at this. And so you need to do a little bit of digging to find. And every team has that, right? There's always going to be things that you're good at and things that you need to focus in your attention on building up. And the quicker you can get a feel for that and then prioritize your time and effort accordingly, the more successful you'll be.
Hi everybody, it's Paul Thomas here. I hope that you're well and you're enjoying the podcast so far. Thank you once again for your continued support listening to the podcast. I just wanted to break into the recording to talk to you about a really exciting partnership that EMEA Recruitment has along with Operation Smile. And as founder of EMEA Recruitment, it's an honour and a privilege to announce this partnership. Personally, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so the mission of Operation Smile is something that I have a strong personal connection with. It's not an understatement to say that the dentists and surgeons that helped me were life changers. It's not only about the actual operations that take place, the support and care post and pre-operation are beyond value, and from personal experience I can only say that I'd not be the confident, happy person I am today without this support. I want to help children experience the support and care and skill that I experienced on my journey, and hope that we can do this along with Operation Smile. Every 3 minutes, a child is born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, and the mission of Operation Smile is to provide help and support to these children through providing 6,000 medical volunteers across 80 countries who are dedicated to help these children with facial conditions, most commonly cleft lip and cleft palate. More than 200,000 children are born with a cleft every year, and they are often unable to speak, eat, socialise or even smile. However, it can take as little as 45 minutes and cost just €180 or 182 francs for Operation Smile to provide a child with life-changing surgery. Now, in partnership with Operation Smile, EMEA Recruitment is raising valuable funds and aiming to create 100 new smiles to support the organisation to provide free surgeries for children and young adults all over the world. Please help us by donating through the link in the bio, or get in touch to see how your company can help get involved too. For the moment, I'll leave you to carry on listening to the rest of the podcast, but if there's anything I can do in terms of answering any questions or finding out how you can help and support EMEA Recruitment and Operation Smile, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you once again and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, something you mentioned at the start of that actually was you put efforts into disrupting yourself, if you like. You mentioned you've taken opportunities to learn and develop, and you've embraced change. I mean, you can see this in your career as well. You obviously worked in the US and Switzerland, and for some great companies like GE and other industries as well, which have pushed you out of your comfort zone. So, I mean, where do you think this attitude to disrupting yourself actually comes from?
Well, I think it's something that I've learned. When I started my career, it was all about the analytics and having that sharp kind of financial skill set, being able to model and look at things very black and white. As I've grown in my career, I've learned more and more about the people management side, but then also having the opportunity to work with some great coaches and mentors and things like that. You pick up some of these models where people help you to understand that the things you did really well that made you a really great financial analyst are not going to make you a great manager. They're not going to make you, the things you do as a manager are not going to make you, a great leader when you get to a bigger role. So you need to re-examine those things, and you need to look critically at yourself. And the better that you know yourself, the more that you can do those things that are going to energize you and push you on to the next challenge and ultimately the next success. So, as I realized myself is that and I think it's probably pretty common, but once you get comfortable, that level of energy drops off a bit. And so when you're in your comfort zone, yes, it's great. And you're doing a good job, but you're also, you never stay static. And so you're either moving forward or moving backwards. And so, you get to a point where you start to have those diminishing returns, and you need to do something, like I said, to disrupt that. And it's the same thing, I think, in a business, where, if a business is plodding along, well, you're not going to just go for 20 years based on that same idea and that same model that you started with. So the business needs to evolve, and you need to challenge yourself, but you do need to create a reason for the change, right? We don't just change for the sake of it. I didn't start working from home because I wanted to. It was because I was forced to. And so when it comes to managing your own career, I mean, nobody else is going to do that for you. Nobody else is going to force you. And so if you say, well, this is my objective, and frankly, for me, I enjoy much more when I'm challenged and when I'm striving for new goals. So even if it's comfortable and easy, once you get to that level of competence, it's not as fun anymore. And so for me, what goes hand in hand with the challenge and the discomfort is that it's fun because you see the progress, and you can measure those hurdles that you've overcome, and you can see the change from September 1st when I joined to now middle of November, where I have a network of relationships within the business. I understand what we're doing a lot better. I'm closer to the strategy. I've had several board meetings under my belt, and so you can feel that progress, and for me, that's fun. I mean, that's what if you're going to spend endless time, in your career working, you need to make that something that's rewarding for you and that's fulfilling. And I think there's various things that make your career fulfilling: the people that you work with, the successes that the business has, but then there's also how you push yourself and see how far you can go. And so, I believe in setting those sort of goals for yourself, and then, tracking your progress. Again, similar, I always tell people that I manage, you should manage your career like you manage the business. You set targets, you measure those targets, you learn from them, you evolve, you have a strategy for the long term, and then you execute in the short term. So, those sort of principles that you use to drive the business forward, you also should be applying those to yourself, because effectively, even if you're not an entrepreneur, your career is your business.
No, it's interesting because I know within that you mentioned a bit about the qualities that you've built up over the years in building your own abilities, but the people around you, and also talked a bit about what you found rewarding in where you are now and the roles you've done. And this approach I find is the people who've had some time at GE often have very similar approaches to yourself. I mean, do you think the grounding that you had from GE has been at the center of what's built your career really, and your approach to these situations you found yourself in?
Absolutely. And I know GE's maybe not quite as illustrious as it was back when I started in the days of Jack Welch. But certainly the program they had, I think, was phenomenal. And that's why I say that for me, that was my education. That was what I consider really the, university education for me in really building my career, and those fundamental concepts, both in how finance is meant to work. And finance did play a key role in driving GE in those days. But also things like I mentioned around, how you manage your career. I would never stand in the way of anyone on my team, no matter how valuable they are, moving forward to the next opportunity, because that was just ingrained in me at GE, that was how things work. And you always need to cultivate the next up and encourage people to continue moving, because, if you have that kind of circular chain going in place, then it works out. If you hold on to people and keep them flat, then, like I mentioned with myself, then they end up having lower energy levels and you get diminishing returns from it. It's not a healthy thing. I think I do owe a lot. And it's interesting because, when I was in school, it was the end of in university, it was the end of the dot-com bubble at the end of the 1990s. And so my goal, at that time, CNBC was like, like TikTok is today. That was like, you went home from class and you watched CNBC because there was a new IPO and there was all kinds of, amazing things happening in the market with technology firms. And so that was like, can't miss TV. And so, of course, I wanted to go in the investment banking direction. And it happens to be that just before I graduated, the bubble started to burst and you started to see a lot of consolidation in those firms. And they were starting to cut all of their graduate intake programs for training. And so the GE program was kind of the top corporate finance program that was out there. But I'll be perfectly honest. For me, it was a bit of like a plan B, it was a fallback. And I think definitely the best decision. And so sometimes these sort of choices, they aren't scripted. But fortunately, I ended up there and it was a great foundation for my career.
Mm. No, it's interesting. As I say, I know a number of people who went through that GE rotation, and you can see how it's really shaped their careers as a whole, but their thinking generally in terms of problem solving and taking opportunities. And I think you mentioned there yourself as well. I'm not sure whether Jack Welch's management style, how well that will go down in the modern era, but certainly at that time it was very, very successful, and there was some really brilliant people that came through that time. And also as part of the answer there, you talked a bit about changing technology and consumer habits, really, in terms of what people do these days. And I thought, obviously, given the situation you're in with the company you work for, you'd be a good person to ask a question around BI and data and artificial intelligence, because whether we like it or not, it's becoming part of our lives more and more, and it's having a big impact on our lives at home and at work. So I just wondered what you think the impact of AI, BI, and data is really going to have on the finance function in the future.
Sure. So certainly, big data and data analysis has been quite prevalent, mainly in B2C businesses. Now, I've spent my entire career in B2B businesses, so it's kind of less critical in terms of analyzing consumer behaviors and things like that, where I think that sort of analysis has paid huge dividends for a lot of companies. Now, what I've seen in a lot of cases is it's extremely challenging, time-consuming, and expensive to get to a clean data set that's relevant, that can be utilized within a business. So just things as simple as trying to reconcile financial data with non-financial data can be extremely time-consuming. Every month you'd have to go through and adjust your financials to kind of match and take out all the one-time sort of accounting adjustments and things of that nature to get to something that's comparable against, some non-financial data that comes from whichever industry that you're in, that you want to try to track trends against. Because otherwise the trends will be meaningless. You'll see a trend go up, but your financials went down, and you say, okay, well, I don't understand this. So that part is extremely challenging. And again, the hurdles to get it clean and keep it clean, right? The maintenance of the data set to keep it relevant. And, frankly, every meeting that you're in, somebody will say, oh, wow, I wish we could track this. And if you accumulated all of that wish list of things that you wanted to track in the business, you would just nonstop be trying to curate this data in order to be able to have those views. And so where machine learning and AI can play a huge role is trying to automate that process and more quickly and efficiently get to data that is actually clean and meaningful and that you can use for analysis. And in the end, data can certainly play a key role in helping you to validate decisions. I don't say make decisions, because I still think you need to have that right business judgment and view of what you're trying to accomplish. And then data can help to support that. It can sometimes show you that your view is off base and you need to tweak it, or it can help to validate and say, yes, this is the direction, and here's kind of, how we can quantify that. But then it also can play a key role in ensuring that you're able to track the decisions that you make. And that's one that I've seen throughout my career that's notoriously difficult and oftentimes not done, is you make a decision, you approve a business case, you make an investment. 6 months, a year later, do you really know whether you've gotten the expected return out of that? Because oftentimes those analyses are done on an ad hoc basis and you don't have the reporting framework to be able to track it. And so that's another way that, if you have a more extensive BI capability and there's more flexibility baked in there, and it's less expensive to be able to evolve that data set, then it can help you to more quickly see that your decisions either are or aren't having the intended effect. There's this mantra that I hear people talk about all the time now. It's kind of a popular one about failing fast and kind of the value in failures. And the truth is, I think everybody accepts that. The challenge is it's very hard to put in practice. There's the emotional side of it of, hey, I want to do this, and I don't want to show that it's actually failing. And so, people that are in executive roles that are making decisions don't typically want to highlight the fact that what they thought was a really good choice actually in the end wasn't. So there's that part of it. But then there's also just how quickly can you get the information and be able to track and know that it is or isn't working. And so that's where this, for me, that's the promise of having more BI and data capabilities, is to much more quickly be able to see, hey, I thought this is what was going to happen. It's not happening. So either I need to adjust course, or I just need to move on and scrap the idea and move on to something else. But the quicker that you can get to that conclusion, you can really save yourself a lot of sunk costs, a lot of time and effort, and you can really put that kind of fail fast mantra into play.
No, it's interesting because obviously with the impact of this, the increased analysis, the importance of the decision making, and maybe there's more accountability for people's decision making now as well, given the extra information that's available. How do you think it's going to change the approach to hiring people and what people are right for roles? Because it feels like that is changing quite rapidly in terms of the analysis of people when they're joining a business and the skills that are needed. So, how do you really think it's going to have an impact in that area?
Yeah, and things are quite unprecedented at the moment in terms of, I guess they call it the Great Resignation, but just what's happening in the labor markets across the world. It's really difficult to get my mind around, and certainly I don't think it's sustainable at the rate that things are changing at the moment. But certainly, again, one of those side effects I think of the pandemic and people reevaluating what they want to do and how they want to spend their work life. Now, in terms of the recruitment process, so I mentioned before about kind of creating that virtuous circle within the company of developing people, ensuring that you have a view of talent within the business and you help them to progress. And then, making sure that you also build a strong team, that you're able to retain those key players that are maybe at a more mature level of their career and aren't looking to change quickly. But then when you bring new people into the team, for me, the most invaluable tool, because we're naturally skeptical as finance people, and so I know people can sell themselves well, right? You can put together a nice CV and you can speak very nicely about the accomplishments that you've had. But, if I don't know you and we haven't worked together, I have no objective way of really separating what's true, what's not, how much are you exaggerating and adding a little something to, here and there in the story. And so, what I've found is a very simple business case. And I think a lot of people are doing this now. I've started doing it really when I first became a manager, because I found it so difficult to evaluate candidates in just a standard, normal interview conversation. So you create a business case template and, give it to the candidate. Again, nothing too complicated, but allow them to both do some technical work, make sure they can do some analysis and see how their technical skills are. But most importantly, see the questions they ask you. What would you like to know that isn't in here to help you to do more analysis? What are the conclusions they come to, even with the limited information and limited time and context that they have? For me, that's more about show me rather than tell me. And so, show me how you would work in a work environment. Now, of course, you can have interns, and that's sort of the premise there, is that you have an opportunity to work together and see how they operate. But when you're hiring, someone that's out of school already and further in their career, I think that's a key one. Now, you'd be amazed, or I was sometimes, to see that people had made it pretty far in their careers without having some basic technical skills. And so it gives you an opportunity to really assess that. You can ask the question, but asking the question, of course, nobody's going to say, well, no, I'm not really good with Excel. But if you ask them to do some work in Excel and you see that they really can't do it, that immediately gives you the red flag. But you'll see a lot of different personalities come out when you ask something. So some people might come in and just be absolutely sure, even though they don't know anything about kind of the background of the business case. But after spending a couple hours, they're absolutely sure that their conclusions are correct and there's no other way to proceed. Then there's some that, won't ask a lot of questions and will do something that's kind of way off base. And rather than ask some obvious questions to help steer them correctly. So it kind of gives you a sense for how people will work. And for me, that has been, extremely valuable in the hiring that I've done. And one of the lessons that I learned in doing it, though, is we used to send it, and I would send it kind of a few days before. I said, okay, let's be fair, give them a little chance to work on it. And I remember having an internal candidate, and they came and they had this amazing business case. So, wow, that's great. And then I had some other people in the office tell me, because they were internal, oh yeah, they were soliciting help from everybody, and it was a team effort. It wasn't necessarily them, which, I kind of debated, well, that's not terrible, because, we do work in team environments, but it actually didn't really tell me a lot about their work. So we kind of shifted that to, we have the candidate come in, we'll do some interviews, have them meet with some different people, in different functions in the business, just to get a variety of perspectives, and then give them an hour or two and say, hey, work on this thing, and then come back and present it and kind of do it in more of a panel. So the people they interviewed with, we all kind of sit together and, just take us through your thoughts, your questions. Try to make it low pressure. It's not about whether you have the right answer or not. It's more about how you approach it and your thinking process.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a good way of evaluating individuals, and it's very much aligned to the modern world, really. You try to push people to find out a bit more about how they analyze information, the kind of questions they ask, and in finance especially. Is about finance business partnering. I think you've got to be able to communicate well and to come across with credibility. And if and ultimately, I guess, if you don't know the answer to something, rather than trying to avoid the situation, be quite open and honest and say you don't know the answer, and that would be far more appreciated than trying to guess the answer as well. And I think that's something that I noticed, actually. I was looking at your LinkedIn recommendations that you've had, and I guess the summary of it would be is that you've showed through the years excellent finance business partnering capabilities and are well organized, and a lot of these recommendations are coming from your sort of previous managers or people who you might consider to be mentors through your career. And I thought I'd ask the question, really, because I know we've talked about people coming in and seeing you as a mentor. But I know earlier you mentioned you've had mentors in your career, and I just wondered if there's any people in particular that stand out to you that have really helped you in your career path.
Absolutely. And that's part of, my motivation in terms of how I work with my team. And, I know that people have given that to me, and that's really helped me growing my career. And so, I try to give that back. But certainly, I had a CFO that I worked under at WorldSpan that then we merged through a Blackstone acquisition into Travelport. And so, he was early in my career. So he gave me my first manager role. So at that point, I was, as I mentioned before, I was in kind of an analyst role. And he gave me that first opportunity to take on a management role, and really spent a lot of time one-on-one, and helped me to understand what it took to step up to that level and to grow my career. And it really kind of, I had some strong progression in the years after and during, working together with him. But then also outside of the finance function, one of the leaders within SITA was, and this was much more about team building, but also that kind of awareness, that self-awareness, and that some of the things I mentioned about challenging yourself and really stretching yourself, and stretching the people around you and your teams. But so one of the leaders within SITA that I worked closely with over the last 6 years also was a fantastic manager and someone that contributed a lot to my continued growth. Because I do think the more that you grow in your career, you get further and further away from your functional expertise. So it's more about how do you contribute and lead within an organization. Of course, you have your functional responsibilities and your team and your expertise that come with that. But a lot of the value that you generate is through the leadership that you bring.
No, it's really interesting. And I think, well, we touched on this a bit through the interview, but I find your background is really interesting because you've worked not only in different countries, but in different industries which have, I think, quite different challenges. If you look at oil and gas, travel, and now obviously the BI data AI field, and I think obviously there's a lot that you've taken through the journey, and you can see that in the way that you present yourself, and I can see there'll be a lot that you can give the people in your team in terms of mentorship and leadership and management on that side, so it's a really impressive career path and life you built for yourself, Tal. So I guess the last question for you really is looking to the future, what are the kind of long-term goals that you have?
Sure. So in terms of the long term, and I don't know how long term, but I guess the next 5 years at least, and I've throughout my career, I've been able to stay a minimum of 5-6 years in most of the companies that I've worked in. So I think between 6 to 8 years is kind of a good length of time where, again, you get a payoff in the investment you make in the company, and they also get a payoff in the investment they've made in you. And then, as I've mentioned before, then you kind of either find a new challenge within that ecosystem of that company, or you move on in a healthy way. And so for the next years, I mean, I'm fully committed and on board with the strategy of Evalueserve. And so, they hired me because they have an ambitious strategy that they're putting in place to modernize the business. And it has, very clearly articulated objectives and goals, but very challenging ones. That said, there's a great management team. There's a supportive board structure in place, that pushes us, but also is very supportive. And so my goal is really to do everything that I can to see the company reach those objectives that are set, within this strategic vision that we have. So from a business standpoint and part of the executive leadership team, that's really my focus. But then on the functional side, what I really want to do is to recreate kind of the team dynamics that I've been successful in building in the past. And certainly every team has its own kind of, character and just wonderful people that I've had the opportunity to work together with. And so, I know that we have the same here, and I want to get to know them and their strengths and make sure I'm able to help put them in the right place and enable them to be successful, and just build that strong team ethos where we enjoy working together. We kind of tackle challenges head on, and we can be a strength and a foundational element within the company.
Ah, that's awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing the next steps of your career, fold out, and hopefully it'll all go well. And obviously, I mean, we're recording this in November 21, where I know you mentioned it earlier. It feels like we're you never quite know what's around the corner, but hopefully by this time next year you'll be able to fly out and start meeting all your new colleagues and see them all in person rather than on Teams and Zoom. So with a bit of luck, things will progress well for you there. And really huge thank you for your time today. I've really learned a lot in the conversation. I know the network will take a lot from it as well. So I mean, if there's a way for the network to reach you, what's the best way they can connect with you, Tal?
Sure. I mean, LinkedIn, I think, is the best. It's a great tool. I think I would probably lost touch with a lot of people throughout my career if it wasn't for LinkedIn. So yeah, definitely can reach me on there.
Perfect. Well, what we'll do when we send the podcast out onto LinkedIn, we'll make sure that we put a connection to your profile, so it's easy for people to reach out to you. And once again, huge thanks for being a guest on the show, Tal. Really appreciate it, and had a great conversation. So
yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Tal.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you for the opportunity and for everything that EMEA does.
Excellent. Thanks, Tal. Have a good day. And
all right, you too.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, Paul.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you'd like to reach out to Paul or myself, please feel free to send a connection through on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them all at our website, www.emearecruitment.eu.